Right, now, if you were thinking of writing that story that you've always wanted to get onto paper, you'd probably be forgiven for thinking that dyslexia, if you were living with it, would hold you back. Matthew Williams is here, on to book number 2, Shadowchild, the follow-up to previous novel Shady Corner. You are dyslexic then?
I am, yeah.
But so, I'm interested, how would you describe your dyslexia? How severe is your dyslexia?
It's, when I was at school, all the way through school, I didn't know I was dyslexic. I was aware of the condition, and there was other children at the school that had dyslexia, and I didn't know I had it. So whenever there was anything, if there's any dyslexics out there, they'll relate to what I'm saying. If I was asked to read out loud, it was horrifying. It was really, really, really bad, and it would always be a difficult thing, and I didn't really understand why. And then my writing was always muddled up, and it took all the way through until my final year at school, when I had a new English teacher. I can't thank her enough for what she did, but within 2 or 3 weeks she was like, "Matt, you're dyslexic. I can see from the way you read, I can see from the way you write." And I asked her, what's the best thing I can do to cope with it, and she just said read. So I was sort of into horror and dark sort of things at the time anyway, so I started reading horror books, and that really helped me to overcome the reading side of it. And at that point in my life, there was nothing further from my mind than writing a book. The writing side really came about from a bit later in my career, because from learning to read and being comfortable with being dyslexic, I went on and got very good grades in my engineering apprenticeship. So I was working as an engineer, and then there was a looming promotion, and that's when dyslexia came back at me, and it was sort of like, I'm going to have to learn to communicate in written form, and that was very scary again. And I thought, well, reading helped me get past the reading side of it, so writing will help me with that. So what I actually did is I had an idea. It was actually for the Shady Corner, my first book, and I wrote it as a short story, and it just helped me to cope with what I was doing. Again, there was no intention of ever becoming an author or publishing anything I was doing, but then I think it was about 8 years later I found it, and I'd been reading loads and loads of other horror books by Stephen King and James Herbert and Richard Lehman and people like that, and I found this story that I'd written, and I read it back, and I thought, that's not far off as good as some of the things I read. So I thought, well, I'll turn that into a proper novel, and I did. And then it was actually 2008 when I first published The Shady Corner, and it was republished in 2012. And then I've been working for a very long time on Shadowchild, which was released the end of February this year.
Have you sort of had to change the way that you work based on the fact that your understanding of your own dyslexia?
Little bit. I have to. Computers have really helped, because obviously you've got Microsoft Word and things like that that really help me out, because if it was the old typewriter days, I think I'd be getting through a lot of paper, and I'd have very sore fingertips.
BSC, isn't it? Before spell check.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah. So I'd be re-going over everything, but no, I have to. What I do find is I read as I'm writing it. I do read it back to myself a lot, and it all sort of comes together. But I do notice a lot of the mistakes there. But the more I do it, the easier it becomes. The dyslexia is really the bit that makes the words difficult on the page. I like to think that my imagination's always been good for the story. And the good thing about it is I've just actually had a lot of editorial reviews done for both books, and they've just gone live actually on Amazon.com for Shadowchild, if anybody wants to have a look. When they came back, that was really, really good for me, because it's really given me the belief that my writing is good. There's very little criticism of the characterisation or the stories, and there's a lot of actual citing of the originality in the stories, particularly in the horror genre. So
Yeah, tell us about this book then. So you started with the Shady Corner was the first one, which is still available, is it?
It is, yeah.
And Shadowchild's the second one that you've moved on to. It's a beautiful cover, and that's been recognised recently.
It has,
as well,
yeah.
And so tell us about the story behind Shadowchild. I'm a bit worrying about Feckingham Parish. I wouldn't be going to an estate agent necessarily soon and asking to find me a place there. Put it that way.
I hope I haven't tarnished the reputation effect, but it is all fiction. Apart from that, I did actually do a little bit of historical research. The first chapter is based around an event that I set in 1629, and I picked that date specifically because that's when Feckenham Forest was deforested. That's the year it was actually deforested. So, but Bennett's Bower, which is the place that the first chapter is set in 1629, was a real manorial court that actually sits where the Feckenham football field now does sit. And I sort of obviously changed the reasoning for the deforestation of Feckenham Forest, and then moved to present day-ish and carried the story on. So there's sort of a myth and a legend in there which unfolds slowly as the book goes through. But yeah, it's sort of this horror that visited the village in 1629 has come back in 2008.
And it's quite, it's sort of more paranormal than...
It touches on a few things. I obviously don't want to give too much away.
Isn't it? Yeah.
There's definitely a paranormal element in there, and a little bit of a possession story in there. There's also probably a nod. It's more of a nod to a zombie type thing as well. But when you reach the end of the book and you find out what's really going on and what the evil is, that's when you discover that it's not quite what you think. And luckily, in the reviews I've been receiving, most people are quite surprised, and they think there's a lot of originality in there. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased so far.
Yeah, and if you were to compare your style to someone else's, I mean, would you be able to say, if you like novels by one person, you'd be quite a fan of yours?
I'm not the best person to make that comparison. My wife would probably say my writing's most like James Herbert, who is an author I probably read mostly when I first started reading as a late teenager. I don't compare myself very much to the writings of Stephen King in the style. The stories obviously have a crossover because they're in the horror genre, but the writing style of Stephen King is quite different to mine. So no, James Herbert, it's some more in that sort of easier read style, if I may say it like that.
Yeah. So Matthew Williams, the author, Shadowchild, the book out now.
They are both out now, yes.
Excellent, from all good, probably online
They're
retailers.
all online. They are available in print and they're available on Kindle as well.
Great. So if you have a look online, search for that. Shadowchild's got a beautiful cover. It's well worth looking for that. Have a look as well. Really interesting stuff. Matthew, thanks very much for popping in.
Okay, thanks very much for having me.